What if the silence wasn't peace, but bait? In the silence beneath, a solo backpacker sets out into the rugged peaks of Idaho's Sawtooth wilderness in search of solitude. What he finds is a lake that shouldn't exist, a forest that watches, and something ancient stirring beneath the ground. Something that doesn't sleep, only waits. In no service, 4 friends on a digital detox trip vanish into the fog-choked Ouachita Mountains. As voices from the past whisper through the trees and time seems to bend, they begin to suspect that the forest remembers them and is rewriting their reality. These aren't just camping trips gone wrong. These are traps, and you're next. Turn out the lights, put your phone away, and listen. But whatever you do, don't answer when the woods call your name. Welcome to Sunday Scares, where the shadows whisper and nightmares come to life. But did you know that 96% of you watching aren't subscribed? If you love chilling tales that keep you up at night, hit like to feed the darkness, and subscribe if you dare. Now turn off the lights, settle in, and let the horror begin. The Ouachita Mountains weren't what most people pictured when they thought of Arkansas. There were no grand peaks like the Rockies, no snow-capped ranges or iconic lodges. Instead, the Ouachitas stretched in long, forested ridges, ancient, weathered, and quiet. Too quiet if you asked Leo, as he bounced along the last stretch of gravel road behind the wheel of his dusty Toyota Tacoma. Pines pressed close on either side, tall and thin and swaying slightly, even though there wasn't a breeze to be felt. The sun was falling lower in the sky, dipping behind the ridgeline and turning the forest a muted amber. Leo adjusted his rearview mirror and glanced at the 3 figures asleep or half-conscious in the back seat. Rhea was slumped against the window, earbuds in, hoodie up. Next to her, Marcus was snoring quietly, an empty energy drink can rattling between his legs. And tucked against the door, mouth half open and neck bent at an uncomfortable angle, was Danny. "Rise and shine, campers," Leo muttered, tapping the brakes just enough to jostle the truck and make the suspension creak. "We're almost there." Rhea groaned but didn't move. Marcus blinked, confused. Danny stretched and looked out the window, her voice groggy. "Where is this?" "Nowhere," Leo said with a smirk. "That's the point." They were all friends from college. Kind of. Leo had been the one to plan the trip. 3 nights camping in one of the most isolated corners of Arkansas. No phones, no tech, no distractions. A full digital detox. The spot he'd chosen wasn't marked on most maps, but he'd found it on an old hiking forum, a secret site down an unmarked fire road, half a mile from an abandoned lookout tower that hadn't seen use since the 80s. They passed a rusted gate, long since pushed open and swallowed by undergrowth. From that point on, the gravel turned to dirt. The road grew narrow and uneven. Pines stretched tall on either side, thick as bars on a cell. The sun had vanished now, and a thin veil of early dusk settled over everything, turning green to grey. Marcus leaned forward. "Yo, this road's sketchy as hell. You sure this isn't, like, government land?" "It's national forest," Leo said. "Legal to camp. I checked." "You always say that," Rhea muttered from under her hood. Still, no one argued when the truck finally pulled into a natural clearing beside a stand of towering shortleaf pines. The place was perfect. Flat ground, soft pine needles, a fire ring of blackened stones half covered in moss. No other cars, no signs of humans, no service, of course. All 4 of their phones were already bricks. They set up camp while the last light disappeared. Leo took care of the fire. Danny unrolled sleeping bags in the tent. Marcus cracked another drink and wandered the perimeter with a headlamp like he expected bears. Rhea, never far from her sarcasm, muttered something about serial killers. "Relax," Leo said. No one's been out here for decades. We've got the whole forest to ourselves." They ate hot dogs and marshmallows over the fire, passing around a small Bluetooth speaker until it died. The battery drained with no way to recharge. The darkness outside the firelight was deep and absolute. Occasionally a breeze stirred the trees, but otherwise the woods were deathly still. Even the usual forest sounds, crickets, owls, frogs, were strangely absent. They blamed it on the elevation, or maybe the season. It was mid-October after all. But as the fire died down and the last embers glowed like red eyes beneath the ash, the silence pressed in harder than it should have. Rhea spoke first. "Is it me?" she asked, poking the fire with a stick. "Or does it feel off?" Marcus chuckled. "Off like what? Creepy?" "Yeah, it's the woods, man. Classic horror movie setup." "No, not creepy," she said. "Like, too quiet." Leo tossed another log on the fire. "We're 50 miles from the nearest town. It's supposed to be quiet." But he heard it too. Or rather, didn't hear. Not a single chirp, call, or flutter. Just wind. If that, and the occasional crack of the fire. After dinner, they retreated to the tent. It was a big one, a 6-person pop-up Leo had borrowed from his brother. The kind with mesh ceiling panels, so you could see the stars if the fly wasn't on. But the trees above were too thick for that. It was like camping beneath a roof made of bark and shadow. Somewhere in the early hours of the morning, Leo woke up. He didn't know why. No noise had stirred him, no rustle or snap. He lay still, heart thudding. Outside the tent, the forest was silent, but not empty. He felt it, like a breath being held too long, like something waiting. A pale light filtered through the mesh overhead, moonlight maybe, though it seemed too cold, too blue. Leo reached for his phone by habit, even though he knew it had no signal. The lock screen said 3:07 a.m. Something moved outside, just a whisper, a shuffle. Not far off, maybe 10 feet away. Leaves shifting, branches stirring. A pause, then another movement, closer. Leo's mouth went dry. He turned his head slowly, expecting the others to be awake. But they weren't. Marcus was curled on his side, snoring. Rhea and Danny were dead still. He held his breath. There it was again. A soft, dragging noise, like something heavy being pulled through the pine needles. A low thud. A sound of air shifting, like wings spreading without flight. He thought about calling out. Instead, he sat perfectly still. The sound faded after a few moments, swallowed by the trees. Eventually, he lay back down, eyes wide, pulse hammering in his ears. In the morning, he would chalk it up to a bad dream, but he would never forget the shape he thought he saw through the mesh panel above. Something tall, too tall, pausing just outside the tent. Watching. Leo didn't tell the others about what he'd heard when they woke. Not at first. He wasn't sure it was real. Maybe he'd dreamed it, half asleep, nerves playing tricks on him. But as the morning settled in, and the fire sputtered back to life with help from Marcus and a crushed paper bag, he noticed something that pulled the memory from the fog of sleep into sharp clarity. There were drag marks outside the tent. He was the first one up, had stepped out barefoot to take a piss, and there they were, long, shallow furrows in the pine needles, not made by boots or paws or any kind of wheels. Just 2 parallel streaks, maybe 6 feet apart, dragging through the forest floor like something heavy had been hauled away during the night. He followed them with his eyes until they vanished into the woods beyond their clearing. Leo said nothing. Instead, he poured powdered coffee into his enamel mug and stirred it with the same stick Rhea had been poking the fire with the night before. The silence in the woods had lifted slightly. He could hear the distant trill of a bird now, the low drumming of a woodpecker somewhere uphill. But the stillness still sat in the bones of the place, like a smell you couldn't quite place. Danny emerged from the tent with sleep still in her eyes and an exaggerated groan. She stretched her arms and gave a mock shiver. Okay, officially colder than I thought it'd be. My toes are ice blocks. It's Arkansas, Marcus muttered, unzipping a protein bar. You expect Cancun? Rhea joined them last, tossing her hoodie back to let her thick curls breathe in the morning sun. I had the weirdest dream last night, she said. Thought I heard someone outside the tent. Leo looked up. Someone? Rhea shrugged. I don't know. Footsteps, maybe. I thought it was you. He tried to keep his face neutral. Nope, didn't leave the tent. The group wandered away from camp after breakfast, hiking east along what might have once been a firebreak. The trail narrowed with every step, eventually swallowed by underbrush and pine roots. They weren't really going anywhere, just exploring. No phones, no maps, just sun, trees, and uneven ground. It was about 2 miles from camp when they found the stone wall. It rose from the side of the hill like a spine, maybe 4 feet tall, built of weathered grey rock. Lichens spread across the surface like old wounds. It didn't look modern, too crude, too broken down. Marcus suggested it was a property line from some long-forgotten homestead, but there were no signs of civilization, no structures, no tools. Just the wall, running in a crooked snaking line and ending at a wide tree whose bark had grown around its edge, swallowing the stone like it had been planted centuries ago. Leo ran his fingers along the rough surface. It was cold, too cold for the sunlit day. Maybe it's older than that, he said aloud. Like, ancient. Danny gave him a side eye. You're not going all Blair Witch on us, are you? He laughed it off, but something about the wall stayed with him. It had a presence. The way it divided the landscape felt intentional. Not just a boundary, but a warning, a ward, a line not meant to be crossed. They crossed it anyway. Past the wall, the terrain sloped into a narrow hollow, damp, shaded, choked with ferns and low brush. A creek bed wound through it, dry but etched deep into the dirt. And at the far end, half hidden behind a thicket of deadfall and briars, they found the tower. It had once been a fire lookout, but now it was just bones, rusted steel legs, the skeletal remains of a staircase twisting up to a platform long since collapsed. Graffiti covered what was left of the base. Initials, slogans, childish pentagrams. The air here felt heavier, still, smelled faintly of copper. Okay, creepy, Danny muttered. This place has bad vibes. Marcus was already poking through the rubble beneath the platform. Yo, there's a ladder under here. Some kind of hatch. Rhea didn't come closer. Let's not, yeah? We're in the middle of nowhere. What if something collapses? But Leo was drawn to it. The structure felt magnetic. He stepped closer, crouching near Marcus. There was a metal panel embedded in the ground, partly buried under leaves and pine needles. Someone had once pried it open. Scrape marks lined the edge. Storm cellar? Marcus asked. Maybe, Leo said. He reached out and knocked. The sound echoed, not in the open air, but down. Deep. As if it didn't strike dirt beneath, but a chamber. A void. And then, for a second, just one, Leo swore he heard something. Not an echo. A reply. Software muffled. Rhythmic. Like a voice behind stone. He pulled his hand back. They didn't open the hatch. They turned back before the sun dipped too low, heading west toward camp. Leo kept looking over his shoulder, unable to shake the feeling that something had shifted behind them. The forest seemed darker now, the wind less random, like it was breathing with them, watching. That night they built a bigger fire. Danny found extra branches and kept feeding it even when no one asked. The heat and light seemed like barriers, fragile but necessary. They talked louder than usual, joked more, pretended nothing felt wrong. Around midnight, Marcus fell asleep sitting up, head bobbing like a broken marionette. Rhea curled into her sleeping bag without a word. Danny stayed up last, staring into the flames. Leo sat beside her, silent. After a long time, Danny finally spoke. "I heard something last night, too," she whispered. Leo turned. "What kind of something?" She didn't answer right away. Then, "It sounded like my mom." He blinked. "Your mom?" Danny nodded, eyes still locked on the fire. "She was calling my name. Over and over. But my mom's in Tucson. Hasn't camped in her life." Leo swallowed hard. Maybe it was a dream. Danny finally looked at him, her eyes dark and serious. "It wasn't coming from my head," she said. "It was coming from the woods." The third day began with fog. Not the kind that rolled in from valleys or settled over lakes like in the postcards, but a thick, clinging wall of white that swallowed everything beyond the fire pit. Leo stepped out of the tent at sunrise and couldn't see past the pine tree 6 feet away. The air was wet with it, heavy on the skin, beating on the nylon of their tent and the sleeves of his flannel. The sound of dripping surrounded him, pine needles releasing moisture like a slow, weeping chorus. He crouched to rekindle the fire, but the wood wouldn't catch. Even the driest branches hissed and smoked without ever truly igniting. He could hear Marcus stirring behind him, a grumble and the soft creak of sleeping pads, followed by Rhea's usual morning mutterings. Danny, however, didn't emerge. Not for coffee, not for the granola bars, not even when Leo called her name twice. Eventually, Leo unzipped the tent and leaned inside. She was sitting upright in her sleeping bag, arms folded across her chest, her eyes wide and glassy. She didn't move when he spoke. Didn't blink. Just stared forward. At nothing. "Danny?" he said softly. She flinched at his voice. Not a little twitch, but a full-body jolt like someone pulled a string behind her spine. Her mouth opened, but the sound that came out wasn't a word. It was a low, hoarse humming. Leo felt a chill run down the back of his neck. She blinked hard. Once, twice, then slowly seemed to come back to herself. "Sorry," she whispered. "I didn't sleep." "Bad dream?" "I don't think I was dreaming," she said. That afternoon, the fog still hadn't lifted. The sunlight tried to break through the canopy, but it came down in watery shafts, casting everything in an eerie, muted glow. It was like standing inside a faded photograph. The trees seemed farther apart than before, the shadows longer, reaching across the clearing like fingers. Leo couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, not just observed, but studied, weighed. The woods had grown patient, like something waiting for them to notice it had teeth. "I think we should go," he told Rhea while Marcus was off relieving himself. "Today. Now." She gave him a look, equal parts annoyance and confusion. "Leo, we have another night." "I don't like how Danny's acting, and I think this place is doing something to us." She snorted. "What? Like haunted?" "I don't know. Maybe. Something's not right." Rhea crossed her arms. "You were the one who picked this place." "I know." She stared at him for a moment longer, her face softening. "We don't even know where the road is anymore." That stopped him cold. "What?" Rhea nodded toward the tree line. "You ever notice we haven't heard a single car in 2 days? Not one. Not even in the distance. This isn't a gated forest, Leo. There should be hunters, rangers, planes overhead." Leo turned toward the trees. They were denser than before. He didn't remember them being so close to camp. That afternoon, they packed most of their gear and tried to hike back the way they'd come. Marcus led the way, Leo behind him. Danny and Rhea followed, both quiet. They followed the line of ridges and landmarks they remembered. The crooked pine, the stump shaped like a horn, the double fork in the trail where they'd laughed about being truly lost just 2 days ago. Only the fork wasn't there. They walked in circles. Or rather, the landscape twisted underfoot. No matter how far they hiked, the same landmarks reappeared in different configurations. The same rock, the same bent tree, the same stone wall. The wall should have been miles east. "We're not moving," Danny whispered. "We're walking, but we're not moving." Marcus threw his water bottle into the brush and shouted, "This is bullshit!" The echo didn't come back. It just vanished, swallowed. They returned to camp in silence. The fire was still out. The fog was creeping back in, thicker this time. It moved low across the ground like something alive, something hungry. That night, they didn't try to sleep. They sat shoulder to shoulder, backs to the fire pit, watching the tree line. The silence broke sometime after midnight. A sound moved through the woods. Not a voice, not quite. A low groaning, stretched too long, like a wooden beam slowly splitting. Then something soft, like fabric dragging over bark. A whisper that didn't carry language, only presence. It circled them. Something moved just beyond the light. The pines swayed without wind. And then came the static. Not loud, not sudden, but subtle and constant, like the hiss of an untuned radio. Leo looked around in confusion, trying to locate the source. Then Rhea said, "Do you guys hear that? That sound?" Danny was rocking back and forth now, muttering to herself. Her voice was barely audible, but Leo leaned closer and caught fragments. "Don't answer it. Don't look. It's not her voice. It's not her voice. It's not..." "What isn't?" he asked. She looked up at him and, for a moment, he thought she'd gone completely mad. "My mother's been dead for 3 years," she said. "I remember her voice, but last night, it called me out here. It sounded exactly like her. Same breath, same laugh. She said my name, and I wanted to follow it." Rhea paled. Marcus stood up, shining his flashlight into the trees. The beam flickered, then cut out. He slapped it, shook it. Nothing. The batteries were fresh. Then Leo's watch buzzed. He looked down. It wasn't telling time anymore, just a line of scrambled numbers, symbols, glyphs that weren't in any known language. The static grew louder. Rhea started crying, and all around them, the forest whispered in 1,000 stolen voices. They didn't sleep the last night. They just sat in the ring of their dying fire, staring outward into a darkness that didn't feel like night anymore. It felt alive. It pressed in on them, close and tight, like they were being smothered by the forest itself. The static hadn't stopped, not once. It didn't come from the trees or the fire or any object they could find. It came from everywhere, from inside the ground, from the needles in the pines, from the air in their lungs. Every so often, it would crackle higher for a second, like a voice trying to emerge, then sink back into its soft, maddening hiss. Danny sat furthest from the fire now, arms clutched around her knees, rocking slightly like a metronome gone wrong. Her voice was ragged, hoarse from the endless whispering. "It's in the trees," she said again. It was the trees. It used the trees. But it was older than them, before them. It's what's buried beneath this place. Something they forgot to dig up. Marcus had stopped speaking hours ago. He sat on a log with his head in his hands, muttering every so often about needing to go, just go, but never getting up. His flashlight had stopped working, his phone screen was blank white, and his hands shook constantly, like he was stuck in the static himself, some fragile piece of tech shorting out under pressure. Rhea tried to keep them together. She was the only one who still seemed aware, who still had some tether to reality, though even she was fraying at the edges. She didn't cry anymore. She just stared outward with wide, glassy eyes, her voice flat and robotic. "Something's wrong with the land," she said. "Not haunted, not cursed. It's like we're not supposed to be here, like we're being filtered out." Leo didn't know what that meant, not really, but he felt it. The way sound worked differently now. The way fire gave off heat, but no warmth. The way the trees shifted when you weren't looking, like they had joints just under the bark and knew how to move without being caught. The sky above had lost its stars. The fog had climbed so high that it wasn't a ceiling anymore. It was just white. Endless, low-pressure blankness, thick enough to press down on their lungs. Their breath came shorter, shallower. Everything smelled like rain that never came. At some point, Leo noticed something else. The forest had grown silent again. The static was there, yes, but no birds, no wind, no crunch of branches in the distance. The entire world was holding its breath, waiting. He looked at the fire. It was down to red coals now. Every time someone tried to feed it, the wood hissed and crumbled like dust. There was no fuel left that would burn. They'd tried bark, broken chairs, even part of Marcus's sleeping mat. Nothing caught for long. Then, as if punctuating the end of all things, Danny stood. She rose like she'd heard something. Not alarmed, not afraid, just drawn, like a sleepwalker answering a call. She didn't look at any of them. She didn't say a word. She just stepped out of the firelight and into the tree line, into that fog-drenched blackness. Leo jumped up instantly. "Danny!" he shouted, moving after her, but the fog swallowed her. He followed the trail of her steps, barefoot, he realized. She'd left her shoes at camp and pushed past the trees. Branches scraped his arms, tearing at his jacket, and every footfall sank deep into the loam. But after 10 seconds, 15, a minute, she was gone. No movement, no sound. He called again, and the forest didn't echo. The others caught up to him. Rhea was breathing fast, nearly hyperventilating. "Where the hell did she go?" she whispered. "Leo, where is she?" "She just walked in." "There's nothing here." Marcus pushed past them, stumbling, almost tripping. "She went this way," he said, pointing through the trees. But the trail was gone. Even the prints in the pine needles had vanished. It was as though the forest had healed itself, covered her path in real time, or, worse, rewrote it. Then came the voice. "Leo." They froze. It came from deep in the trees. Not loud, not screaming, just spoken, clear and calm. "Leo," it said again. But it wasn't Danny's voice. It was his mother's. She'd been dead for 6 years. He turned slowly back toward camp. The fog seemed to part for just a second, just enough for him to glimpse a figure standing where the fire had been. It was tall. Too tall. Its body was humanoid, but stretched, silhouetted. It had long arms, long fingers, and no distinguishable face. Where a head should have been, there was only static, rippling air, like heat waves off pavement. But the sound came from it. The voice. And the white noise. All of it. "Leo," it said again, "come sit with me." He took a step back. The others were rooted in place, staring at the figure. It didn't move. It just was. Then Marcus turned and ran, not into the woods, not toward the figure. He just bolted in a random direction, into the dark, into the fog, screaming something incoherent. He vanished before they could stop him. Rhea grabbed Leo's arm. Her grip was ice. "We're leaving," she said. "Now. I don't care where we go. I'll walk until my feet bleed. I'll crawl. But I'm not staying here." Leo didn't argue. They ran. No compass, No trail. They didn't look back, not even when the voice said his name a final time, soft as a lullaby. They ran until the fog lifted, barely, just enough to see more than a few feet, just enough to recognize a trail marker nailed into a pine, old and rusted. Then another. Then the faint, blessed crunch of gravel beneath their boots. They reached the road as the sun was beginning to rise, a smear of gold behind the mist. They didn't stop until they found the truck. Danny wasn't there. Marcus never reappeared. Leo drove without speaking. Rhea sat beside him, staring out the window, eyes blank. When they reached cell reception again, the notifications came in. Hundreds of them. But one stood out, a voicemail from his own number. He listened to it only once. It was static for 30 seconds. Then a whisper, barely audible, emerged from the white noise. "You left us behind." I've always found peace in solitude. The kind of solitude you can only get miles from cell service, far from traffic noise, people, obligations, everything. The mountains, especially the old ones, had a way of wiping the slate clean, and the Sawtooth wilderness in central Idaho was about as far from the modern world as I could get on a tight schedule and a tank of gas. It was early September when I parked my truck at the trailhead just past Stanley. The air was crisp, the sky a deep, unmarred blue. The sun spilled like honey across the distant ridgelines, gilding the jagged granite teeth that gave the Sawtooths their name. I stepped out of the truck, stretched, and took a long breath. Pine and earth filled my lungs. I felt my shoulders loosen in a way they hadn't in weeks. It was going to be a good trip. Just me, my gear, and the silence. The plan was simple. 5 days solo hiking off-grid to a lake I'd found on a decades-old Forest Service map. The lake wasn't named and wasn't on any official trail, just a faint blue smudge tucked against a steep cirque. I marked it with a red X and plotted a path that would lead me along established routes for 2 days, then off-trail over a saddle ridge to the lake. No one I knew had heard of it. That's what sold me. My gear was lean, ultralight tent, sleeping bag, bear canister full of oats, jerky and pasta, a topo map, compass, water filter, nothing fancy. I'd done this before, enough to know what I needed and what I didn't. The first day's hike carried me deep into the wilderness. The trail switchbacked through dense lodgepole forest, climbed into granite-strewn meadows, then dipped toward hell-roaring lake, where a few late summer hikers had scratched their names into the dirt with boot prints. But as the hours passed and I hiked deeper, those signs faded. Eventually, it was just me, the whisper of wind in the trees, and the rhythm of my footsteps. I'd been out there long enough to know what a healthy forest sounds like. Chirping birds, buzzing insects, the occasional chatter of squirrels, or the rustle of something in the undergrowth. But by mid-afternoon, I realized I wasn't hearing any of that. No birds, no insects, just the soft crunch of my boots and the distant rush of wind over stone. It wasn't just quiet, it was wrong, like the forest was holding its breath. I stopped, pulled off my pack, and sat on a flat boulder to drink. That's when I first felt it. Not a sound exactly, but a pressure. A sort of hum that settled at the base of my skull. It made my ears pop, like I'd suddenly changed elevation, but I hadn't moved at all. I chalked it up to fatigue, or maybe dehydration. Drank more water, forced myself to eat half a protein bar, and pressed on. By early evening, I reached a clearing just above the lake. It was the perfect spot to make camp. Flat, dry, ringed with trees, and had a distant view of the peaks cutting across the horizon like black glass. I set up my tent, filtered water, and cooked dinner over a tiny stove. As the light faded, I caught myself staring at the tree line too often, scanning between the trunks. I wasn't looking for bears. I'd dealt with them before. This was different. It wasn't a fear of predators. It was the sense that the woods were listening. That night, I woke up to total silence, the kind that hits like a slap. I didn't know what time it was, just that something had yanked me out of sleep. No wind, no night insects, not even the gentle creak of the trees. I reached for my watch. It read 2:03 a.m. The air inside the tent was freezing, my breath misting in front of me. I unzipped the tent slowly and stepped outside barefoot, standing in the dark. The moon was bright above the ridgeline, illuminating the trees in soft silver. That's when I heard it. Not a voice, not an animal. A sound like vibration, low, pulsing, just on the edge of hearing. I stood there, eyes wide, heart pounding. The sound didn't move. It didn't echo. It just rose. Not through the air, but up from the earth. A bass thrum that buzzed through the rocks and into my soles. I bent down and touched the ground. It was vibrating. Just barely, but steady. Like a massive machine buried deep below. Then it stopped, all at once. Gone, like a snapped wire. I waited. Nothing. Just cold air and a sharp silence that made my skin crawl. I crawled back into my tent and lay awake until dawn, gripping the edge of my sleeping bag. And as the first light touched the treetops, I noticed something new. Boot prints in the dirt. Fresh. Not mine. They came from the woods, stopped 10 feet from my tent, and went nowhere. I stared at the boot prints for a long time, longer than I'd admit to anyone. They were about my size, maybe a little narrower, but not smaller. Definitely not a child's. The impressions were deep, the kind that only form when someone stands still for a long time. Whoever it was had stopped in front of my tent and just watched. What unsettled me most wasn't their presence, but the absence of a return trail. The ground was soft with pine needles and loose dirt. Anything walking away would have left more prints. But the tracks simply ended, right there in front of me, as if the person had vanished into thin air. I spent the morning trying to rationalize it. Maybe they walked backward, stepping carefully in their own prints. Maybe the wind had swept the trail clean. Maybe it was just some Forest Service guy checking in on solo campers. But that made no sense either. There had been no signs of other people for over a day. No distant campfire glow. No voices. No trash. Just me. And now, whoever this was. I packed up quickly, nerves buzzing under my skin like static. The direction of the unknown lake was to the northeast, over a ridge that jutted like a broken tooth into the sky. According to my map, I'd have to bushwhack for at least 3 hours to reach it. The terrain was steep, choked with fallen logs and undergrowth that tangled around my legs like wire. Every so often, I'd glance back at the clearing. I could still see the faint boot prints untouched. By noon, I crested the ridge, panting, shirt clinging to my back with sweat. The sky had clouded over during the climb, casting the landscape below in a slate-colored gloom. Pines stretched endlessly in every direction, broken only by granite outcrops and the pale scar of a dry creek bed. I paused to catch my breath and take a sip of filtered water. That's when I saw it, just a sliver, half hidden through the trees. The lake. It wasn't grand or wide, more like a basin tucked into the folds of the earth. Still, it didn't shimmer like alpine lakes usually did under daylight. It was black. Not the blue black of depth, but the absolute black of oil or obsidian. A mirror without a reflection. Its surface was perfectly flat, despite the wind pressing through the trees around it. No ripples, no waves. Just an unbroken pane of darkness. I should have felt satisfaction. I'd found what I was looking for. Instead, I felt something else. The same pressure behind my ears I'd felt the day before, only now it was stronger. It made the world feel thick, like the air had turned to syrup. The lake didn't seem like a destination. It felt like a warning. I set camp uphill from the shore, maybe 150 yards back. I didn't want to pitch my tent too close. Something about the lake made my stomach twist. I tried to eat, but the freeze-dried pasta tasted like ash in my mouth. My fingers kept trembling, just enough to make lighting the stove a challenge. Afterward, I walked down to the edge of the lake with my journal, trying to put into words what was bothering me. The trees around the shore didn't seem natural. Their trunks were darkened, and the bark had strange growths on them, grayish-white bulges like scar tissue or tumors. I spotted a dead squirrel not far from the waterline, perfectly intact, no sign of trauma or decay. Just still. There was something else, too. Near the far side of the lake, a large tree had toppled. Its roots jutted into the air like skeletal fingers, and around them was a ring of scorched earth, a perfect blackened circle maybe 15 feet across. It didn't look like a fire had swept through. It was too localized, too deliberate, as if something had burned up from inside the ground. I walked the perimeter slowly, footsteps muffled by thick moss and pine duff. And that's when I found the stone circle. It wasn't big, about 6 feet across, maybe a dozen pale rocks stacked in a careful spiral. No moss on them. No sign of weathering. Clean. Recently placed. At the center, a flat slab stood upright like a miniature altar, tilted slightly toward the lake. I knelt to inspect it, fingers brushing the surface. The second I touched it, I felt a vibration run up my arm. I jerked back and nearly fell. Then came the sound again. Not a noise in the air, a resonance in the bones. A low hum, deep and slow, like a tuning fork struck somewhere far beneath the earth. It pulsed once, twice, then faded. I backed away, heart hammering, and returned to camp without looking back. I didn't sleep that night. The wind died down completely, but the tent swayed every so often, like something outside was brushing past it, gently testing its fabric walls. I kept the zipper closed, flashlight in hand, every shadow crawling too long across the nylon. Around 3 a.m., I heard it again. The hum. Only now it was accompanied by something new. Whispers. Not clear speech. Not words. But the shape of language, as if someone were talking behind a closed door just out of reach. I pressed my ear to the ground and gasped. The vibration was stronger now, steady and pulsing like a heartbeat. I could feel it through the granite, through my bones. It wasn't natural, not tectonic. It felt like breath. The ground was breathing. I lay awake until the gray light of dawn slipped through the tent fabric. I didn't need my watch to know how little time had passed. My limbs were heavy, my thoughts fragmented. When I emerged from the tent, I looked down toward the lake and froze. There were ripples now, perfect, concentric rings spiraling outward from the lake's center, as though something had surfaced just moments before. But the water was undisturbed, no movement, no splash, just ripples, fading outward like the echo of something unseen. I wasn't imagining it anymore. Something was beneath the lake. And it knew I was here. I didn't eat breakfast. I couldn't. My stomach felt like a coiled fist, and every breath I took seemed to come with that same strange pressure, like I was living inside a vacuum just a few degrees off normal. I paced the perimeter of camp, triple-checked my gear, and tried to convince myself that the lake was just a lake, that the humming was stress, that the ripples were wind. But I didn't believe a word of it. Something had changed in the forest. The silence that had once seemed peaceful now felt like a trap, a suffocating stillness just waiting to be broken by a sound I couldn't name. And I kept thinking about the boot prints from the night before, the way they stopped short in front of my tent. the way they simply ended. It was impossible not to connect them to the humming, to the ripples, to the feeling that something was under the surface of the world, just barely holding itself back. Around midday, I found myself drawn back toward the lake. I hadn't meant to go. One moment I was refilling my water bottle at a stream above camp, and the next I was walking along the ridge toward the far shore, as if something had pulled me there by invisible thread. I told myself I just wanted to look at the tree again, the one with the upturned roots and scorched circle around it. But as I approached, I knew I was lying. I wanted answers. I didn't stop at the tree. I walked straight to the stone circle. It looked just as it had yesterday. Clean, symmetrical, out of place. 12 stones in a spiral, flat slab at the center, still slightly tilted toward the lake. There were no carvings, no symbols, no sign that it was anything but a strange arrangement of rock. But when I stepped inside it, everything changed. It was like stepping through a membrane. The air grew colder, thicker. The humming returned, immediate and stronger. My ears popped, and the pressure behind my eyes made me squint. But it wasn't just a physical change. It was psychic. I felt something move through me, not over me, like a current of thought that didn't belong to me. Something old, curious, watching. I crouched beside the center slab and ran my fingers over it again. This time the vibration wasn't subtle. It thrummed beneath my skin, up through my jaw, behind my eyes. The stone pulsed in rhythm with the hum, like it was connected to the source of the sound, like it was a conduit. That's when I heard the voice, not aloud, not in my ears. It was in my head, blooming behind my thoughts like a second consciousness. You hear it now? I staggered back out of the circle, stumbling, barely managing to stay upright. My pulse thudded in my throat. The voice didn't continue. It didn't need to. I had felt the intent behind it. Curiosity, amusement, and something else. A kind of welcome. As if it had been waiting a long time for someone to arrive. Someone to find it. I didn't go back to camp right away. I couldn't. I sat at the lake's edge for what felt like an hour, knees drawn to my chest, eyes locked on the flat black surface. It didn't shimmer. It didn't reflect. It just was. An absence of color and shape and depth. Then I saw them. At first I thought they were stones in the water, just beneath the surface, round pale shapes. But the longer I stared, the clearer they became. Not rocks, not logs, faces, dozens of them, half submerged, motionless, their eyes open and gazing upward, their mouths slightly ajar, like they were screaming silently beneath the surface. Their features were distorted, softened by water, but human, absolutely human. I scrambled back, my feet slipping on the damp shoreline. When I blinked, they were gone. No ripples, no movement, just the still lake, indifferent and silent. I ran back to camp. That night, the forest changed completely. The wind didn't blow. The fire refused to catch. My tent sagged under its own weight, as if gravity had doubled in the area. And the sounds, the forest was full of them now. Not animal noises, not weather, but voices, not clear, but close. I heard my own name whispered from the trees more than once. I heard the laughter of my younger brother, dead 5 years. I heard the voice of my high school girlfriend, saying the exact words she'd said when she broke up with me. All of it layered into the static hum that underpinned the entire wilderness now. I sat in the dark with my knife clutched in both hands. I didn't sleep. I didn't blink. I just listened to the sound of the woods remembering me. Then, just before dawn, I heard something outside my tent. A slow, deliberate scraping. Not claws, not branches, fingernails. I froze. The zipper moved. Not fast, not loud. It just moved, a single tooth at a time, and then it stopped. When I finally dared to look, nothing was there. No prints, No torn fabric. Just the faint scent of smoke and the cold realization that my pack had been unzipped. And inside it, my map was gone. In its place was a single stone, smooth, warm, and vibrating. I didn't wait. As soon as the sky lightened, I broke camp in a frantic haze, stuffing gear into my pack without folding or sorting. I ate nothing, drank little. Every gust of wind through the trees sounded like words now, indistinct but familiar. My name, over and over, always just out of range. The humming beneath the ground had grown louder. It was in my bones. My molars buzzed with it. The trees no longer looked like trees. They leaned too much, arched toward me in ways that defied wind, watching or listening. I didn't go back the way I'd come. I didn't trust the terrain anymore. The topography had shifted. Landmarks were wrong. The sun rose in the wrong part of the sky, and the ridge I'd crossed 2 days before now seemed to stretch on forever in both directions. I followed my compass instead, praying it hadn't been affected by whatever force lived in that lake. It spun slightly as I descended the slope, but stabilized as I reached the base. I didn't stop moving. If I stopped, I was afraid the forest might close in around me entirely. I hiked for what must have been 10 hours. I kept waiting to see familiar signs of civilization, trail markers, cairns, the occasional boot print. But the path I followed only grew stranger. Rocks jutted at impossible angles. Trees stood with roots exposed, hanging in the air like marionettes. At one point, I found a tree split clean down the middle, not by lightning or decay, but opened like a book, its insides hollow and smooth. Something had carved it out from within, and then I found the footprints. My own. They were a few hours old, still crisp in the loam. I recognized the tread of my boots, the length of my stride. But I'd never been here. Not that I remembered. The realization hit me like ice water. Either I'd walked in circles for 10 hours, or something else had been walking with my feet. That broke me a little. I sat down on a rock and shook. Not cried, not yet. Just shook like my bones were trying to rattle their way out of my skin. I stared at the forest floor, at the moss and needles and bits of lichen, and suddenly I couldn't tell the difference between anything anymore. The texture of the ground seemed to shift when I looked too closely, like it wasn't really there at all. Just an imitation of earth. I pulled out the stone again, desperate for something real, something consistent. It had stopped vibrating. Instead, it had begun to whisper. The sound wasn't audible to the air around me. I held the stone to my ear and listened, and I swear to God, I heard my voice. My own voice, repeating things I'd said during the hike. Casual mutterings, complaints about my sore feet, lines from a song I'd hummed on day one. It was like it had recorded me, absorbed me. A stone with memory, and just underneath that, something deeper. Another voice, older, wordless, whispering not to me, but through me. That's when I realized the whispers in the forest had never been from outside. They were coming from below. Everything was coming from below. I stood, dizzy. My pack felt heavier now, not from weight but from presence. The air had thickened again, as if the forest was pressing me out, pushing me towards something it didn't want me to find. I should have turned back then, but I was too far gone. I had to know, had to see it again, just once. So I went back. I don't remember the walk. I blacked it out, or maybe the forest did. The next thing I knew, I was back at the lake. It was different now, no longer flat and black, no longer still. It boiled in silence, great bubbles rising to the surface without sound. The trees around it had receded, literally pulled back, their trunks leaning away as if trying to avoid whatever the lake had become. The sky above had darkened, even though it was still afternoon. Not cloudy, just wrong. like it had been erased and redrawn. And the stone circle was gone. In its place was a depression in the ground, a perfectly smooth hole maybe 10 feet across. I couldn't see the bottom. It didn't reflect light. When I dropped a rock in, I never heard it hit. Then the whispers returned, louder, all around me. Not in the air or my ears, but in my chest, my throat, my blood. I fell to my knees, clutched my head, screamed into the dirt. But it wasn't pain. It was invasion. Something was peeling me open like bark, reading my thoughts, tasting my memories. And I saw it, not with my eyes, in my mind, a shape beneath the lake, immense, uncoiled, older than stone, older than bone, not sleeping, waiting. A presence wrapped around the roots of the mountains, dreaming of voices and ash and warm flesh. It had no face, no name. It only knew. And it had learned me. I ran. I don't remember how I found the trailhead. I just remember the truck, covered in pine needles, half buried in leaves, like it had been sitting there for months. I opened the door and smelled rot. My food had gone bad in the cooler. My GPS flickered to life and told me it was September 18th. I had left on the 9th, 9 days. I had no recollection of 4 of them. I drove straight to Stanley in silence. The road had changed too. Less winding somehow. The sky was grey when I should have had sun. The radio wouldn't pick up a signal until I hit the highway. And when it did, it played nothing but static. Even now, back in my apartment, far from the mountains, I hear the humming when the room goes quiet. I see ripples in my water glass when the fridge hums. And sometimes, when I lie still at night, I feel the mattress vibrate ever so slightly, as though something far beneath me is still breathing. I threw the stone into the river last week, but I still hear my voice whispering things I haven't said yet.